So a seller told me recently, I wanted to buy another condo to rent out. But after hearing all the horror stories from my relatives, I'm very scared. The tenant damaged the house, the rent's not paid on time, someone need to go to small claims. Everything becomes very troublesome. And honestly, I understand why some landlords become traumatized, because all they wanted was stable monthly rental income. But after many years in the property market, I realized something. Most tenancy problems are actually preventable. So stay till the end of this video and you will find out how to not only solve these problems, but also how to prevent them in the first place. Not all. Of course, there will always be difficult cases, but many disputes happen because landlords don't understand tenant expectations. And tenants also don't understand landlords' expectations. And sometimes the tenancy agreement itself already creates problems from day one. Maybe you also feel this way. You like the idea of rental income, but once you imagine repair problems, difficult tenants, arguments over deposits, late night rental messages, then suddenly the whole thing feels very stressful already. Like passive income becomes an active headache, right? I've handled landlord cases, tenant cases, disputes, repair arguments, and honestly, sometimes both sides have valid reasons. And that's the reality. And this is why I always say, property is not just about buying. Buying is easy, but managing properly is the important part. And one of the biggest misunderstandings I see in Singapore is actually the minors repairs clause. A lot of landlords think tenant must pay. Whatever spoils, tenant have to pay. But many don't realize that they themselves are responsible in the first place. And this is where a lot of unhappiness starts, especially in the older apartments. Now, when people talk about tenancy problems, usually they blame tenants or they blame landlords. But after doing this for many years, honestly, many disputes happen because both sides already start with the wrong expectations. The landlord is scared that the tenant will damage the house. The tenant is scared that the landlord will unfairly deduct their deposit and will be made to pay damages that is not their fault. So before the tenancy even starts, both sides are already defensive, right? And sometimes the problem is not even the people. It's the misunderstanding of responsibilities, especially for repairs. And this one causes a lot of unhappiness. A lot. Now, let's say you rent out a fully furnished condo, washing machine included, aircon included, fridge included. Now, after some time, the washing machine spoils. And immediately some landlord will think, tenant must pay. But hold on. The first question is, how old is the washing machine already? If the appliance is already 10 years old, honestly, most likely it's already near the end of its lifespan. And if the tenant tried to repair it before, but still cannot, then landlord may need to replace it. Because ultimately, the landlord still has the responsibility to provide a working appliance if the unit is rented fully furnished. And this is where many landlords misunderstand the minor repairs clause. They think anything spoiled, tenant pay first. But that's not really the spirit of it. The clause is meant for minor operational repairs, not for tenants to subsidize replacement of old appliances. Because at the end of the day, the washing machine still belongs to the landlord. The tenant cannot bring half the washing machine home after the tenancy ends, right? So the landlord must also budget for wear and tear over time, especially the older properties. There was one case I remember very clearly. One of my tenants viewed an apartment, and honestly, the moment she walked in, she loved it immediately. Nice renovation, nice layout, nicely maintained. The space is so big and very quiet, far away from the maddening crowd. Everything looked just perfect. And the landlord was a corporate landlord, so they had their own tenancy agreement. It's very thick. A lot of extra clauses, some of which I've never ever seen in my life before in a tenancy agreement. Like for example, there's this provision like how much the tenant has to pay per square meter if the parquet floor is scratched after the tenancy. So the landlord already presupposed that the tenant will have to polish the parquet floors at the end of the tenancy. Now this is not a normal clause in a tenancy. Now normally, before signing, I will scan through everything carefully first, especially the repair clauses, because honestly, this is where many future disputes already begin. Then suddenly I realized something. I could not find the words fair wear and tear anywhere in the tenancy agreement. I thought it was hidden right behind, and I had to use the Microsoft Word, the find function, to look for the words fair wear and tear. But it's nowhere to be found. Now, for most people, they may not notice this at all. But for experienced agents who have met our fair share of unreasonable landlords and tenants, this is a major red flag. Major. Because what this means is the tenant could potentially be liable for almost anything the landlord considers damage, even if it happens naturally over time. And this becomes very dangerous because things naturally deteriorate, especially older apartments. So let's say the shower hinge gives way, the cabinet starts peeling, the old drawers cannot close properly, the laminate starts bubbling. Sometimes this is not abuse. It's simply wear and tear over time. Normal usage, normal aging, but without the proper wording inside the tenancy agreement, suddenly every issue can become an argument. And once trust breaks down, everything becomes very difficult already. So I told the tenant, honestly, don't sign. Let's turn around and run as far away from this deal as possible. Because sometimes a beautiful apartment with a bad tenancy agreement can become a nightmare later. Even though that means that we have to view another 20 apartments all over again. Trust me, you wouldn't want to be involved in a tenancy like that. And sometimes in order to not pay for things that they should pay for, some landlord agents tell me things like, oh, there's no such thing as a lifespan for electrical appliances. If your tenant don't want to pay for replacement of the washing machine, then they should go and rent those brand new apartments. I don't want to turn this into a renting video or to put people off tenancies, but there really are such unreasonable people around. So that's why I always tell people rental property is not just about collecting rents. It's also about managing expectations properly. So when landlord tries to protect themselves too aggressively, sometimes they create the exact conflict they were trying to avoid. And honestly, most tenants are not looking for trouble. They come to Singapore, work on their job diligently, and want to live happily also. They just want fair treatment. Now, to be fair, it's also not only the landlords. Some tenants can also create very difficult situations. And honestly, sometimes landlords also suffer quietly. I remember one case from one of my colleagues. The tenant traveled for work very frequently, always overseas, always flying. At first it sounds okay, no problem. But later when the tenancy was ending, it became very difficult to arrange viewings for new prospective tenants. Every time people want to view, the tenant is unavailable. Different country, different time zone, different schedule. And slowly the landlord started becoming quite anxious because every week without viewing means there's vacancy risk, possible loss of rental income, uncertainty. This is the part many people don't think about before becoming landlords. Now, of course, tenants also deserve privacy and convenience. Nobody likes strangers entering their house all the time, especially after a long day's work. So again, this comes back to expectations and proper agreements. One possible solution is to clearly state inside the tenancy agreement, viewing appointments should preferably be arranged at timings convenient to the current tenant. But if that's genuinely not possible, then landlord may give proper notice, for example, 48 hours notice before bringing prospective tenants for viewing. So at least there's some structure, some understanding, some balance. Honestly, a lot of tenancy disputes happen not because people are bad, but because expectations are unclear, communication is poor, or one side feels unfairly treated. Then small issues suddenly become very emotional. And once emotions enter, everything becomes harder. Sometimes it starts from very small things, aircon leaking, paint scratches, or some issue ignored by the landlord and not dealt with. Then both sides started keeping score against each other. And the relationship deteriorates very quickly. But after seeing all these situations over many years, I also realized something important. Every investment has friction. The question is not, will there be problems? The real question is, are the long-term benefits worth managing those problems for? And this is where property becomes very interesting. After seeing all these landlord disputes, tenant disputes, repair arguments, I realized something. A lot of people are not actually looking for investment. They are looking for returns with no stress, no uncertainty, no inconvenience, no risk. But honestly, that investment doesn't exist, right? Every investment has some kind of friction. Business has staff problems, stocks got volatility, even keeping cash has inflation risk. And property? Property has tenant issues, maintenance, vacancy periods, repair costs. This is all just part of the game. And here's the important part. The goal is not zero problems. The goal is manageable problems with long-term upside. It will serve you well if you go in with this mindset. Because if you look at property over long periods of time, the asset growth is very meaningful. And this is why I keep saying your property is either funding your retirement or working against it. Some people avoid buying investment property completely because they are scared of tenants. So they stay in a fully paid HDB, very comfortable, very stable, no loan, no stress, sounds safe. But 15 to 20 years later, inflation keeps moving up. Property prices keep moving up. And slowly they realize the asset growth cannot keep up anymore. And this is the hidden risk many people don't think about. And honestly, I can understand both sides. I've seen landlords genuinely suffer from bad tenant situations. But I've also seen people wait too long until upgrading becomes impossible. And that regret is also very painful. So the real question is not, will there be tenant problems? The better question is, how do you structure property ownership properly so the long-term upside outweighs the manageable problems? And if you've been thinking about buying another property but still unsure whether it makes sense for your situation, maybe we can have a conversation first. In the meanwhile, watch the next video that tells you how investing in a condo with 10K income can give you 2.8 million in 22 years' time. Sounds like a scam, right? But I promise you it's not. Promise.